Hello, my name is Elena Martinez. My family didn't just exclude me from the guest roster for my brother's wedding. They labeled me as the staff after I orchestrated the entire celebration. After I funded the promotional materials. After I remained awake countless nights ensuring perfection. But perhaps the most devastating aspect wasn't the exclusion. It was how predictable it felt. As though they'd been rehearsing my vanishing for years, simply awaiting the moment I'd cease questioning why. They didn't banish me from their story with screams. They quietly edited it, removing me entirely. And I can't stop pondering how many of us are silently deleted by those who were meant to cherish us most. Diego opened the package and hesitated. His smile wavered slightly. "It's charming," he said, elongating the final word like an instructor politely dismissing a child's artwork. "Perhaps we shouldn't display it for the engagement celebration, though. It's somewhat amateur." Mother didn't miss a beat. "Your brother's guests expect a certain standard of sophistication, darling, though it's thoughtful that you invested effort into it." They didn't perceive affection in the drawing. They saw deficiency, lack of refinement, lack of prestige, lack of value. I didn't protest. I didn't demand recognition. I simply sat there, nodding as though the sketch hadn't emerged from my hands, as though it hadn't emerged from my heart. Roberto, bless his passive nature, attempted to ease the moment. "Your brother is experiencing considerable pressure, sweetheart. Simply assist where possible." Assistant. Always assist. Assist because I'm the quiet one. Assist because Diego is the golden child. Assist because that's what Elena does. She appears, she fixes, she vanishes. But in that instant, I stopped chewing. I stopped breathing, really. Because something within me shifted. I didn't understand what it was. Not yet. But it felt like the foundation of my patience had finally begun to crack. I rose to depart minutes later. They barely noticed. As I stepped into the warm Phoenix afternoon, I gripped the door handle longer than necessary. That was the first time I realized I wasn't being asked to assist. I was being assigned to serve. Back at my apartment that evening, the space felt too silent. I had opened the windows, allowing the desert breeze to drift through. But even that didn't fill the room the way my thoughts did. My computer glowed on the coffee table, screen still displaying the email Diego had sent earlier. "Final guest registry. Please review for accuracy." It was supposed to be routine. I'd reviewed multiple versions already, ensuring names were properly aligned, spacing consistent, fonts clear. But this one, something felt wrong before I even understood why. I scrolled line by line, alphabetically. Anderson, Brooks, Chen, Davis, Foster, Garcia. But no Martinez, no Elena. I stopped, then scrolled back up, then down again. Still nothing. Perhaps it was an error. Perhaps they listed me under my middle name. I pressed Control F, typed Elena. 0 results. I tried Martinez. Still nothing. I blinked, sat motionless. The air conditioner hummed in the background like it was waiting for me to comprehend the truth. But I already had. It wasn't a mistake. I wasn't overlooked. I was erased. I stared at the document for another moment, then opened my email and began typing. I maintained a tone overly polite. "Hey Diego, quick note, I didn't see my name on the guest registry file. Just wanted to confirm in case it got lost in formatting. Let me know." I reread the message 5 times before sending. Brief, cordial, perhaps too forgiving. Then I leaned back, arms crossed tightly. The clock ticked well past midnight, but I didn't sleep. I wasn't certain if I felt anger, sadness, or just shock. All I knew was that nobody forgets a sister. Not like that. Not when she designed everything. The next morning, I took my laptop to a coffee shop downtown. I figured the noise and caffeine would distract me while I worked on a client's project, but my inbox stared at me like a glowing void. Hours passed. Nothing. By noon, the reply finally arrived. One line, no greeting. "Whoops. Thought you were working, not attending. Hope that's fine. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and stomach. I read it once, then again, then 3 more times. Whoops is for accidentally bumping into someone on the sidewalk. Whoops is for forgetting to bring dessert to dinner. Whoops is not what you say when you intentionally omit your sister from your wedding guest list. I leaned back in the cafe chair, the noise around me fading. Someone near the window laughed too loudly, and the clatter of coffee cups against saucers felt like mockery. I was invisible. That spreadsheet confirmed it. That message sealed it. Later that evening, I walked to the park. The sun had begun its descent, casting long golden shadows across the grass. I found a bench that wasn't too weathered, and sat with my phone silenced, my hands idle. It wasn't the first time this had occurred. Not exactly this, but the same sensation. Being useful, but not valued. Present, but peripheral. There was my college graduation dinner, where my mother spent more time discussing Diego's girlfriend's new job than my degree. The housewarming party for my first apartment, where I was asked to photograph the family instead of being included. The Christmas, when they forgot my gift, because the budget went toward Diego's new motorcycle down payment. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that they were simply distracted, that it wasn't personal. But sitting there, I realized I'd been building a case against them for years without knowing. Brick by brick, disappointment by disappointment. The difference now, this time, I had evidence. That spreadsheet, that email, that tone that declared everything crystal clear. You're not one of us. I looked up at the branches above, leaves rustling in soft defiance of silence. My throat burned, but I didn't cry. Not yet. My mind was too sharp, too alert. I whispered it aloud, not to anyone in particular, just to feel how it sounded leaving my lips. So this is how it begins. Not with a fight, but a silent removal. I stared at the email again, the glow from my laptop screen casting long shadows across my living room. The same single line repeated itself in my mind like a nursery rhyme with a cruel hook. Whoops. Thought you were working, not attending. Hope that's fine. I didn't know which part stung more, the word whoops or the assumption that I never intended to be there as a guest. It wasn't the shock of being excluded that hit hardest. It was how unsurprising it felt, like muscle memory, like I should have anticipated it. This wasn't the first time, I whispered to nobody but the half-empty glass of wine beside me. It's just the clearest cut. I closed my laptop, but the ache didn't stop with the screen. It kept breathing under my ribs, this hollow knowing that silence doesn't always signify peace. Sometimes it's the loudest message a family can send. Sometimes the silence of those you love wounds more than their words. Maya Angelou had written something similar, and it landed now with a weight I hadn't felt since the last time I told myself to let it go. I didn't sleep that night. I turned off my phone, left the television silent, and sat by the window watching my own reflection shift against the glass. For hours, I sat with a question that had no answer. What would happen if I simply stopped appearing? The morning light didn't do much to lighten anything. I made it to my studio downtown and tried to focus on a branding project for a couple marrying at a winery in Sedona. My client, Isabella, a photographer who always smelled like vanilla and coffee, was there reviewing layout proofs. "You're a magician," she said, tapping her finger on a mock-up of the seating arrangement. "Seriously, every time I send you something half-formed, you transform it into art." I smiled, not from pride, but because I needed that sentence, needed to hear it from someone, anyone. When she left, I opened my sketchbook and without thinking, scribbled a line across a clean page. When strangers value what your family ignores, it's both a wound and a liberation. I paused, let the ink dry. Then I flipped the page and wrote something else. I'm not going to ask to be seen anymore. I'll stand where the light naturally falls. It was the first time I didn't second-guess myself for writing something like that. I closed the book, slid it into my bag, and stepped out for a walk. The park nearby was nearly empty, just a few joggers and a woman trying to keep her toddler from eating sand. I wandered to a shaded bench, not from habit, but instinct. I needed space to listen to the noise in my own head. And in that stillness, memories began to press against me like a slow tide. I remembered when Diego graduated from college, and I was asked to design the itinerary for his post-graduation European trip. I wasn't invited to go, just to make it look polished. There was that family photo at Thanksgiving where I was handed the camera. "You're the artistic one, Elena. Better composition, right?" I had no doubt my face would have disrupted the symmetry. And Christmas 3 years ago, my name wasn't on the gift list. When I asked, Carmen just laughed. "We assumed you'd understand. You're not really materialistic, are you?" It wasn't neglect. It was design. It was a pattern. Each memory felt like a receipt I had never filed, proof of a long-running transaction where I always paid but never received. A breeze carried the scent of cut grass and distant barbecuing. Children squealed from the playground. And in that moment, the contrast between that noise and my internal quietude felt jarring. I wasn't angry. I wasn't devastated. I was clear. This hadn't started with the wedding. The spreadsheet, the whoops, those were just the punchline. The joke had been running for years. And I'd been the only one who hadn't laughed. I stood up, brushing off my jeans, and turned toward the studio. The air felt different, not lighter, but steadier. My spine straightened without my telling it to. If being helpful meant being forgotten, maybe it was time to become inconvenient. The late afternoon sun poured through my kitchen blinds, slicing the countertop into neat sections of gold and shadow. My phone buzzed with a text from Carmen. "Call when you get a moment." That was her version of polite urgency. Never a question, always a command dressed in manners. I rinsed my mug, dried my hands, and dialed. She answered on the second ring. "Elena," she said, her voice already focused on the final preparation list. "We'll need those place cards by Thursday. Maria says the printer needs additional lead time." I pressed the phone to my ear, staring out at the neighbor's cat stalking birds. "Did you see the last email I sent? I was just checking about the guest list. I didn't see my name anywhere." A pause. Not long. Just enough to confirm what I already knew. "You're not a guest, Elena," Carmen said like she was correcting a child's misunderstanding. "You're part of the production." It didn't arrive with a sting. It came like an instruction, as though I'd confused my role in all this. Part of the production. So now the silence had a voice, and it wore my mother's tone. I didn't argue. I didn't explain how that spreadsheet felt like a spotlight that never reached me. I just said, "Okay," and hung up. Not because I agreed, but because there was nothing left to clarify. 2 days later, I walked into the print shop just before closing. The bell above the door chimed with that little sound that always made me feel 12 years old again, trailing behind my father to collect art supplies for his classes. "Hey, Elena," said Marcus from behind the counter. "Got your wedding order all boxed and ready. This one's gorgeous." He slid the white cardboard boxes toward me, stacked in neat precision. "Your big day approaching?" I didn't correct him. "Something like that," I said, signing the pickup slip. On the drive home, the scent of ink and paper filled the car. It should have been an aroma that made me proud. I had designed every detail, programs, signage, menus, down to the calligraphy that Sophia insisted be elegant yet modern. I had paid from my own pocket for the premium paper, the gold foil accents. Nobody asked me to. I just didn't want them to look cheap. Back home, I spread the materials across the dining table. Everything appeared flawless, yet my name wasn't on any of it. No designed by, no initials in the corner. It was as though the work had materialized from thin air, like magic. The phone rang again, this time with Diego's name flashing. I answered from muscle memory. "Hey," he said, already breathless. "The boutonniere on my jacket is crooked. I think I bent something when I hung it up. Can you come by tonight and fix it? I paused, hand resting on the edge of the table. You know I'm not a tailor. He laughed lightly. Yeah, but you're creative. Close enough. The line went dead. That was the sound of something inside me detaching. That night, the jacket lay draped over my armchair, like a body awaiting revival. I sat on the floor, needle in hand, thread between my teeth. I stitched carefully, methodically, because despite everything, I still refused to send him down the aisle looking disheveled. But when I turned the jacket inside out to finish, I saw the label. It was one I'd added weeks earlier, back when this had still felt like love. A tiny white tag stitched into the inner lining. For my brother, with love, E. I stared at it for a long moment. Then I took my scissors and cut it cleanly away. If I was never acknowledged as a sister, why should this jacket carry the name of one? I folded the garment neatly, placed it back in its cover, and taped a note to the hanger. Repaired. No charge, no credit. I left it on their doorstep before dawn, rang the bell, and walked away. That night I didn't sleep, but for the first time, I wasn't losing rest over what I was missing. I was measuring what I was no longer willing to give. The phone call came just as I was applying silver leaf to a welcome sign for another client's rehearsal dinner. It was nearly 10 p.m., and I had deliberately left my phone on silent, trying to absorb the calm that came with being alone in my studio. But the missed call alert flashed, "Mom," and a minute later, another buzz came through. This time a text. "Urgent. Call me back tonight." I sighed, cleaned my hands, and debated whether to pretend I hadn't seen it. But something in me, that lifelong instinct to avoid conflict, nudged me toward the call. So I dialed. "Elena," she said, no preamble. "Maria needs the final place cards and welcome signage by tomorrow morning. Can you confirm that's happening?" I leaned against my work table, biting down the answer I wanted to give. "I already said I wasn't doing anything else for the wedding," I said, calm but flat. There was a pause. Then the dagger slid in, smooth and practiced. "Don't turn this into drama. Your brother's reputation is at stake. You don't want people thinking the family can't even manage this properly." That was the line right there, the place where obligation wore the mask of concern. I didn't scream. I didn't hang up. I said, "I'll handle it," and ended the call. Not for love, not for gratitude, but to avoid shaming them. As I pulled out the files to finalize the cards, a sick realization washed over me. Tomorrow was the anniversary of my grandmother's death. 2 years since she passed in her sleep at the care facility. I had planned to visit her grave, to place fresh flowers on the headstone that read, "Beloved matriarch, forever remembered." Instead, I would be printing table numbers for people who didn't know my name. I stared at the last page of the design. At the bottom of every card, I had once printed a small note, "Designed with heart, E." Without blinking, I deleted it from every single file. When the export finished, I whispered aloud, "I didn't let them steal it, abuela." But I gave it away too easily. The next morning, I loaded the materials into my car. I drove to the venue alone. No music, no thought really, just that tight coil in my chest, unwinding with every mile. At the location, the event coordinator, Maria, greeted me with a warm smile. "Beautiful work as always," she said as I handed over the boxes. "Thanks," I said, pausing before turning. "You'll be attending, right?" she asked, flipping through the files. I smiled. Not the polite kind, the knowing kind. "Not exactly," I replied, "but I'll be remembered anyway." She looked a little puzzled, but didn't push, and I was glad. There was nothing left to explain. As I walked back to my car, the breeze kicked up through the palm trees that lined the parking lot. I rolled the window down before starting the engine, just enough to let the air touch my skin. I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I was done. Sometimes walking away is the loudest way to be heard. And this This was the last thing I'd ever do for people who saw my silence as compliance. But silence doesn't protect you. It only delays the moment they erase you entirely. The sun had barely cleared the mountains when I pulled into the Desert Bloom Resort parking lot. I parked far away purposely, not because there weren't closer spaces, but because I didn't want to be seen arriving. I hadn't slept. My hands were steady, but only because I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times. I had come early, not to celebrate, but to ensure every sign, every printed card, every piece of curated visual language was placed exactly where it belonged. I didn't wear black, too dramatic. I chose charcoal gray instead, with nude heels and no jewelry. Not to stand out, just to look like someone who belonged in the space. As I walked through the reception area, a quiet pride built in my chest. The welcome board gleamed under natural light. The escort cards were arranged like soldiers on the mahogany table I'd requested. The color palette, muted coral, champagne ink, floated through the space like a signature only I could read. And then I heard her voice. "Oh, that's the coordinator," Carmen said, her tone casual as though she were pointing out a vendor to the arriving guests. "She's very detail-oriented." There was a small group with her, Sophia's relatives, I presumed. One of them smiled and waved at me kindly. I nodded back, too stiff, too controlled. She didn't say, "That's my daughter." She didn't say my name. Just like that, in front of people I would never see again, she severed the last thread tying me to the title of family. I had been introduced like furniture. I didn't flinch, I didn't speak. I just turned and walked toward the back, toward the catering staff setting up trays of appetizers. Later, during cocktail hour, I stood by the floral arch, adjusting a sign that had begun to tilt. I didn't belong in any photographs. Nobody was waiting for me. I stayed busy because staying still would make me feel too visible and too erased simultaneously. "Excuse me," a woman's voice said behind me. I turned to see a guest, middle-aged, perfectly dressed. "Are you with the catering service?" I blinked. "No." She smiled apologetically. "Sorry, you just looked very coordinated." "Excellent work, though. Everything's gorgeous." I nodded and stepped aside. That was the second time today someone had mistaken me for help. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had indeed helped. I had helped so well they no longer saw me at all. I had blended so seamlessly with the function that I had functioned myself out of existence. By late afternoon, the sun had begun to soften its heat, and the reception hall was nearly ready for guests to be seated. I walked through the space slowly, table by table, napkin by napkin, every folded place card, every illustrated menu mine, and my name nowhere. Not on the program, not on a thank you sign, not even on the corner of the event layout board where I used to hide my initials as a signature. "They didn't bury me," I muttered under my breath. "They planted me where they thought nobody would notice." I pulled out my phone, opened my notes app, and typed a line I'd read once from a woman who had rebuilt her life after divorce. "Remember this. Remember how they erased you while using your hands." I didn't cry. I didn't text anyone. I just saved the note. Standing in a room full of my work, I realized I had designed myself out of the narrative. I had been so good at making things seamless, I hadn't noticed the cost of being invisible. If I was going to be invisible, I'd better start choosing when and where to disappear on my own terms. The morning after the wedding, I walked into a small coffee shop 3 blocks from my apartment. One of those quiet, sunlit places where the music is just background, and nobody tries to talk to you. I ordered a latte and settled into the back corner, hoping to read a few client emails and mentally sweep away the last 24 hours. Instead, I opened Instagram. Diego had already posted naturally. "The most magical night of our lives," he had written. "Gratitude to everyone who made it perfect." The post was a carousel, wide shots of the reception hall, close-ups of the programs I had hand-lettered, the custom timeline I designed for the guest welcome bags, The champagne station with signs I'd stayed awake until 4 a.m. to complete. My name wasn't in the caption. Instead, he had tagged someone else. Couldn't have accomplished it without the brilliant creative vision of Lotus Events. You are incredible. I stared at the screen, not blinking, just watching the comments accumulate. Incredible design work, Lotus. This is your finest yet. The branding is unreal. You are a genius. This rivals magazine weddings. I felt like I was underwater, hearing everything muffled, like sound filtered through Betrayal. The applause was real. It just wasn't mine. But the work, that was mine. Every curve of every font, every color matched by precise code, every layout sketched, scanned, revised, and delivered on time. I sipped my latte without tasting it, thumb frozen above my phone. I didn't comment. I didn't text him. I didn't scream. Instead, I went home and opened the folder on my desktop marked Martinez Wedding. Inside were contracts, proofs, sketches, every step of the process. At the top of the pile was a draft vendor agreement for the Desert Bloom Resort, addressed to me. But when I opened the final version, my name was gone. The booking confirmation had been issued under Diego's business name. The email address was his. The invoice sent from his company account. The description read, Design Collaboration led by Lotus Events. They hadn't just stolen credit. They'd restructured history. Fury didn't come like a flame. It came like cement, cold, heavy, immovable. I printed the files, not to confront them, not yet, just to have something that said, I was here, I built this. People steal your work when they can't create their own legacy. That evening, I returned to the resort under the pretense of collecting my toolkit. Maria was still there, clipboard in hand, walking the perimeter of the reception hall with the grace of someone who makes chaos look effortless. Everyone's talking about the design, she said, smiling. Lotus must be thrilled. I didn't correct her. I didn't flinch. Instead, I walked to the back corner where I had kept my sketchbook throughout the week, tucked beneath a linen-draped side table nobody had touched. Still there, still mine. I opened it, flipped to the page that held the original floor plan. In the bottom right corner, I had once scribbled in pencil, Designed by E.M. I erased it. In its place, I wrote, Remember who you are, not who they make you pretend to be. Then I closed the book, zipped my toolkit shut, and turned to leave. If I had to vanish for them to shine, I decided it was time to blind them with what I built next. The reception hall had begun to buzz again, that kind of low, glittering hum that fills a space when everyone's makeup is still perfect and nobody has spilled champagne yet. I stood in the back, behind a column wrapped in desert sage, watching the projector flicker to life. The music softened, lights dimmed, and the crowd turned toward the screen. The montage began. Slow pans across engagement photos, childhood clips of Diego playing soccer, Sophia in dance recitals, a brief shot of Carmen and Roberto on a cruise I was never invited to join. Laughter rose from the audience at the funny ones, soft sighs for the sentimental bits. But the video I had sent, the one I filmed weeks earlier in my studio, where I sat and spoke genuinely, vulnerably about our childhood, about watching Diego grow into himself, about wanting his happiness, wasn't there. I waited through the entire presentation, even after the screen faded back to black, even after the applause. I stood completely still, arms folded across my chest as though I could hold myself in place. Then I stepped aside and made my way to Maria. She was standing near the AV booth, clipboard in hand, squinting at a schedule. Was the complete media file used? I asked softly. She looked up. Pardon? I submitted a video tribute. Diego said it would be in the montage. Maria flipped through her folder, checked her phone, then called over one of the tech assistants. He shrugged. We just used the version his assistant emailed over. It was already edited. Maria turned back to me with a polite grimace. I'm sure it was an oversight. Of course it was. Not an attack, not a rejection, just a simple, effortless exclusion. They hadn't even removed me with malice. They simply hadn't thought I mattered enough to verify. I needed air, the kind that didn't come from vents or linger under chandeliers. I stepped outside into the service corridor behind the reception hall. It smelled like old roses and the remnants of the catered salmon. I stood under a single sconce, the yellow light haloing the stucco wall, and let my arms hang loose at my sides. The door creaked behind me. "Elena," Carmen's voice said, calm and low. I didn't turn. "You're not going to do something regrettable, are you?" I finally looked at her. She was composed as always, her dress a deep burgundy, her posture perfect. "Your brother's night is important. Please don't make this about yourself. You know your father left things in a certain way, and so did I." The implication wasn't subtle. The family business, the trust, all the things I'd never asked for, but that she held like a leash. "This isn't about family," I said. "It's about control." Her expression didn't change. "It's about maintaining dignity." I gave her a half smile. "Don't worry, I don't want anything that comes with your conditions." Then I turned and walked away. In the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel of my car, not driving, not crying, just sitting. My hands rested in my lap, folded around a gift box I had wrapped myself. Inside was a framed photo of Diego and me as children, sitting on the backyard swing set, barefoot, holding melting ice cream. I had written a note on the back, "For the version of you that used to love me." I stared at the lid for a long time, then opened the door and stepped out, but not to deliver it. I placed the box back into my bag, slid it under the passenger seat, and closed the door. "Forgiveness is giving up the hope that the past could have been different," Oprah had said. I wasn't angry anymore, just finished. As I started the car, my phone buzzed. A text from a number I hadn't seen in months. "Heard about your work on the Martinez wedding. Can we talk?" I didn't answer right away. Maybe they had taken my seat at the table, but someone else had just opened the door to a room I designed myself. 2 days had passed since the wedding, but the noise hadn't died. Not in my head, and certainly not online. I sat at a small cafe on the edge of downtown Phoenix, shaded by a weathered umbrella, nursing a lukewarm espresso that had long lost its charm. My phone buzzed every few moments, but I hadn't opened any notifications until I did. Diego's wedding post had gone viral, not trending viral, but just enough to make the rounds through every corner of his curated social circle. There were hundreds of comments now, most of them gushing. And then I saw one. "Wasn't your sister the one who did the design? Thought she'd be more prominent?" I froze, scrolled again. The reply underneath had a familiar username, Lotus Events. She contributed a few elements, but the vision was entirely Diego's. It was important to keep it cohesive. The words were casual, clean, diplomatic, but I could feel the eraser in them, like bleach on fabric. They didn't just omit me, they diluted me, as though I had been an optional detail, not the framework. Then came the private message from Maya Chen, an old friend from college who had attended the wedding. "Didn't know you weren't there. Everyone kept asking where you were. People assumed you were behind the design." Strange energy when your name didn't come up. So it wasn't just me. The absence hadn't gone unnoticed. It had been whispered about, explained away, smoothed over by the people who had orchestrated it. They didn't simply cut me out. They wrote me out, and I had let them. I returned home, dropped my bag on the couch, and opened my inbox. An industry newsletter had arrived earlier that morning. I scrolled through the headlines until one caught my eye. Inside the Martinez wedding, a masterclass in modern elegance. There were photos, my signage, my table numbers, my design board. The credit read, Lotus Events Group. I opened each image and checked the metadata. My name was gone. The files had been exported again, scrubbed clean as though I'd never touched them. This wasn't miscommunication. This was curated erasure. I didn't scream. I didn't post a rant. Instead, I opened a private thread with my lawyer friend, Patricia, and dropped every screenshot into the folder. I didn't ask her to sue. I just asked her to preserve it so I would have proof, not for them, for me. That evening, I sat at my kitchen counter and opened Instagram. I uploaded a quiet carousel of photos, close-ups of my mock-ups, the original digital sketches, a few behind-the-scenes shots I'd taken before the event began. No names, no accusations, just the work. I typed a caption slowly. They didn't invite me, but I was already there. Every sign, every detail, every font. You know where the real story is written. I hit post, then turned off the phone. An hour later, when I checked, the post had already been shared dozens of times. My inbox was filling with messages from other designers, from brides-to-be, even from strangers. And at the top of the pile was one from an account I hadn't seen in years. Saw your work featured. Interested in hiring you for a Napa wedding next month. We want your name on everything. I leaned back in the chair, let the words settle around me like armor. They thought I wanted a seat at their table. I was building a house next door, and now people were knocking. 1 week after the wedding, I was in my studio again, door half open, morning sun creeping across the floorboards. The place was quiet, just the soft hum of my computer fan and the faint sound of traffic outside. My hands were busy smoothing a vellum overlay across a custom invitation for a vineyard wedding in Sonoma. Then my phone rang. "Hi, is this Elena Martinez?" The voice was polished but kind. Clearly someone used to managing chaos with a calm tone. "Yes, speaking. This is Jennifer from Elite Event Planners. I saw your work at the Martinez wedding. Absolutely stunning. We were wondering, would you be open to being featured directly on our designer roster?" For a moment, I didn't answer. Not because I was unsure, but because I wasn't used to being seen. "I'd love that," I said finally. "Thank you." I hung up and sat there, still. They had taught me what silence felt like. Now I wanted the world to hear my name. I opened my website, deleted the old tagline, typed in a new one. Designed with integrity, signed by the creator, and hit publish. By midday, my notifications were exploding. Not just likes or shares, but something deeper. Acknowledgement. I scrolled through tagged posts and saw my handle popping up beneath Diego's wedding photos. People were asking questions. Designers I'd never met were commenting, "Is this the same style I saw from Elena Martinez last year? Looks familiar." Then I saw it, a blog post, anonymous but sharp. It dissected the wedding aesthetic, comparing screenshots of the final design to my sketches. Ones I had posted months before, time-stamped, watermarked. The article didn't accuse, it illuminated. And then, like wildfire, a picture appeared. It was the gift box I never delivered. A staff member had found it backstage, unopened, in a bin next to leftover centerpieces. The note was clearly visible. "For the version of you that used to love me." Someone had taken a photo and posted it anonymously. Within hours, the quote had gone viral. I watched quietly as it spread. No caption from me, just quiet truth. That evening, I met Isabella, one of my photographer clients, for wine. She leaned across the table and whispered, "You've seen what's happening, right?" I nodded. She didn't push. "Word is," she said, "Diego's losing brand partnerships. Vendors are asking questions, something about design confusion. His team's in damage control mode." I let that settle. The universe had shifted. Not violently, just adjusted its weight. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. A number I hadn't saved. Carmen. I didn't answer. She called again. This time I picked up. "You've said enough," she started. "Don't ruin the family's reputation over a misunderstanding." I laughed, not meanly, just finished. The family's reputation isn't mine to protect anymore. She was silent. Not because she agreed, but because she had no more leverage. Sometimes justice isn't loud, I said. Sometimes it's just the truth being undeniable. I didn't threaten. I didn't explain. I just kept working. And in the quiet that followed, I could almost hear it. The sound of my name finally echoing in the spaces they had tried to keep me out of. I hadn't just walked away from their wedding. I had walked into my own power, and that they couldn't delete. Sunday morning broke quieter than usual. There was no phone vibrating against the counter, no group message thread buzzing with updates, no voice in my head reminding me to check for edits, confirmations, or disasters. I made my coffee slowly, grinding the beans by hand, letting the kettle whistle before pouring. Then I stepped onto my apartment balcony and just sat. Across the street, someone's sprinkler system activated. A dog barked 2 houses down. Life moved without ceremony, and for once, I didn't feel obligated to perform in it. I hadn't spoken to Carmen, Diego, or even Roberto since the wedding. Not a text, not a call. And the strangest thing was, I didn't miss it. The silence no longer hurt. It freed me. Some people leave not because they stop caring, but because they start caring about themselves. 2 days later, I received an automated reminder from the Desert Bloom Resort about an unclaimed toolkit box. I hadn't even realized I'd left it. I replied and arranged to pick it up, thinking it would be a quick, emotionless errand, a retrieval, not a reckoning. When I arrived, Maria greeted me with that steady calm I'd come to admire. She didn't flinch or overcompensate, just handed me the box and said, "You were the soul of that event, even if they didn't say it out loud." That would have been enough, but she paused, then reached under the front desk and slid over a slim white envelope. "Found this mixed in with leftover decorations. Thought you might want it." I recognized my handwriting before I even touched it. The thank you note I had written for Diego back when I believed love was still a bridge we could build from opposite ends. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. I tore it in half and dropped it into the recycling bin by the exit. That version of me was gone. Later that week, my studio held its soft opening. It wasn't grand, just an open door, some wine, string lights, and a sign that read Elena Martinez Design in hand-brushed serif font. People came. Clients I'd worked with quietly in the background for years now stood in the center of the room, introducing me as though I had always been front and center. One woman, a florist from Scottsdale, looked around and said, "I didn't realize you were behind so many of the events I've loved." I smiled, not politely, fully. "I was never the background," I told her. "They just made sure I stood in the shadows." I posted a photo of the banner that evening with one final caption. "I wish them well, but I've stopped wishing for their seat at the table because I built my own." Some roots grow deeper after being cut, not because they forgot the wound, but because they learned how to bloom beyond it. The room was exactly as I remembered it. High ceilings, modern fixtures too sleek to be humble, and light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows like it belonged in a magazine. But this time, I wasn't arriving with a box of signs or a last-minute seating chart. I walked into the Desert Bloom Resort with a microphone and a nameplate. Keynote speaker, Elena Martinez. Topic: Reclaiming creative credit in modern business. I stepped onto the stage where Diego had once stood in his black tuxedo and borrowed gratitude. I looked out at a room of young designers. Fresh eyes, new ideas, no context for what this space had meant to me months earlier. And I began. I spoke about boundaries, about authorship, about what it means to do work that's invisible until someone else wears your effort like a crown. I didn't mention names. I didn't need to. But my voice carried across the room with a certainty I hadn't possessed the last time I stood in this building. "You don't heal by returning to what broke you," I said. "You heal by building something they can't take from you." Afterward, during the networking hour, a journalist approached me, sharp suit, notebook in hand. "Off the record," she said gently, "I've spoken to 3 vendors, 2 assistants, and 1 photographer. All of them confirmed what you did for that wedding. I've seen the email threads, the design drafts, the credits that never named you. I nodded. The truth always has a trail. The article published 2 days later. It didn't shout. It simply laid everything out. Documented timelines, metadata, quotes from insiders who had been too quiet at the time. No fire, just light. I didn't post a reaction. I didn't share the link. I updated my website with a single addition, press verified. Unbothered. Diego's PR team issued a vague apology, something about miscommunication in the creative process. Sponsors stepped back quietly. A few influencers unfollowed. Lotus Events' account went private, and I kept working. Weeks later, I stood in my new office, larger, filled with natural light and the low, warm noise of movement. My team had grown. 3 interns now filled the desks I'd once sat at alone. All women, all quietly brilliant, all used to being underestimated. A framed quote hung near the entrance. Don't just make space, build rooms. That afternoon, a letter arrived. Not from Carmen, not from Diego, but from Marcus, the print shop owner who had prepared my wedding materials, the only one who had called me by name that day. Inside was a handwritten note. Your silence taught me more than their shouting ever could. Just wanted you to know. I sat with that for a long time. No tears, just stillness. Because this was the victory. Not the article, not the followers or contracts, but this one voice that said, I saw you, without needing to be told. They called me the staff. So I staffed myself with everything they thought I couldn't own. Because in the end, the legacy you leave behind is never about who invited you. It's about who remembers you and why. There comes a moment in life when you stop begging for a seat at someone else's table and start building your own. For years, I thought loyalty meant silence, that keeping the peace was more noble than claiming the credit. But silence, when weaponized, doesn't make you invisible. It makes you forgettable until you choose to remember yourself. If you've ever been the one behind the curtain, the one who worked harder, loved deeper, and still got left out of the story, you are not alone. And you are not powerless. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up and say, that was me. I made that. And I'm not afraid to be seen anymore. So let me ask you this. Have you ever had your contributions erased? Has your name ever been replaced on something you built? And if so, what did you do next? Have you ever walked away, not out of defeat, but out of dignity? If this story touched your heart, know that every perspective matters here. If you found something in this story that made you stop and think, know that in this space, we don't just tell stories, we reclaim them. Thank you for being here. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter.